Welcome to the fifth season podcast, Conversations on Successful Aging. I'm David Lowry, and I'm joined with my good friend and co host, Don Drew. We believe aging is a privilege, and we want to have honest conversations on how to do it well. Hello, Don.
Hello, David. Welcome, everyone. Today, we're stepping away from the relentless rush of the modern world and moving toward the quieter center of who we are. We started this last week, and we're going to be working on it for the next couple weeks. David, in our last episode, we spent time in what the program calls the Dream Lab, introducing this posture of contemplative listening to the interior life through dreams, waking moments that linger, and questions that we don't resolve quickly.
What I want to do today is go much deeper into this practice and to talk about how we can sustain it over time. I don't know about you, Don, but I have started and stopped more things in my life than probably anybody, right? But what we want to do today is sit with the dream and talking question it, and most of all, discover what it's forming in us. Anything that truly forms a life will ask something significant of you in return. And we want to talk about what is this thing going to ask of you?
I've been thinking about this all week, and what struck me most was how simple the practice sounds the way you described it last week. Okay, just pay attention, write down what stays with you. And yet, even in just 1 week of trying to actually do it, I noticed how much internal resistance comes up. Beyond the discipline itself, there's an interior voice that keeps popping up asking, am I just making this stuff up? Is this inner wisdom just talking to yourself?
And I totally understand that. And I want you to know that even though I've been doing this for a while, I still get those same kinds of resistive thoughts. And I think our mind, or some people call it your egoic mind, sometimes resist being told to shush up and to relax for a minute while we check out and allow something happening in the interior of our lives to come to the fore. Because there is a temptation when we're introduced to an interior practice to assume that if it's the right practice, it's going to feel natural and effortless, and it'll just be like your favorite latte. You're just going to want to slurp it down all the time. And the fact that it's hard might mean that something is wrong, but that's looking at it a bit backwards. Because actually, any simple practice is not necessarily hard because of the practice being hard. It's because the practice itself is the difficulty. It's the showing up. And we want to look directly at this inner work and what it will require of you. We want to understand what it's asking of us. And over time, the key phrase is going to be it's an accumulation. It's not a weekend project.
Let's start with a gap between how the practice sounds, which we already said it sounds pretty simple, but that and what it actually demands. What is that unexpected thing that happens when you start to actually do the work?
It's like starting an exercise program, or maybe it's a special way of eating, or maybe it's just a new habit that you want to form. Maybe it's cutting out something in your life or adding something to your life. You realize that even though it sounds easy to do, and it's really not all that hard, if you're being honest, sometimes it turns out to be a little bit harder than it sounds. We spend a great deal of energy trying to manage the story we tell ourselves about who we are and what we're all about. And sometimes it's just a way of staying comfortable, and it keeps us from going a little deeper. This practice that we're talking about is designed to nudge you and disturb you in a gentle but persistent way to examine a little more deeply the things that have been lodging in your consciousness for years, but never really taken the time to look at.
You know, I noticed that this week. I sat down to write about a moment from the previous day that had kind of lingered with me, an interaction that had felt slightly off where I said something I wasn't entirely proud of. My immediate defensive instinct was to try and explain myself and provide a context that would make my behavior look understandable and justified.
Sure, I totally understand that. I want to be the hero in all of my stories too. But hey, congratulations. What happened when you caught on to what you were doing?
I forced myself to write it down anyway, completely stripped from any justification. It was highly uncomfortable, and I didn't really necessarily expect this, but a little bit of a relief. Like something that had been held at arm's length was finally allowed to be what it was.
Congratulations. That's exactly the center of what we're going for here. There are some things that I have been actually, well, let me just say, ashamed to write down. What if somebody were to find it? Or I don't know if I want to put this to paper. There's discomfort, but that's not really the ultimate goal, is to make you uncomfortable. The goal is the relief that comes when you stop managing your image and just allow it to be whatever it is. I know some of my struggles, and I know some of my defects, and I know some of my good things too. But the relief of being honest is that we don't feel like we have to justify our defects nor praise the things that are good about us. We're just going to learn how to be honest about who we are and hope that that's enough to begin the change we need.
How can we successfully transition from this skepticism of making it up to the reality of actually assessing a deeper psychological and spiritual truth? If you tell someone that you spend your morning sitting quietly and asking yourself questions in your own mind, the response is usually a polite laugh. David, Don, you're just talking to yourself.
Well, and you know what? First of all, I want to acknowledge that, in a sense, that's exactly what we're doing if you just look at it from a surface level perspective. And I also want to say that one of the reasons that I'm being extremely honest here is that, Don, and I think you and I have talked about this and we agree, we're trying to strip away the woo woo, the extra dimensional characteristics of this practice, because we believe the practice stands on its own and doesn't need to be justified. We're not trying to turn people into gurus, and we're not trying to pose ourselves as gurus. I call it self-directed contemplative conversation. Self-directed, that means you are starting and in charge of it. It's directed, and it is a contemplational a conversation that you have with yourself. Now, if you think of the mind as being like a calculator that only deals with what you're punching in at the moment, then talking to yourself really is all that you're doing. But I can tell you this, after about 45 years of teaching in the communication field and studying marriage and family therapy, I've come to realize that the human mind is a very profound thing. It's not just a calculator or a flat surface. It's more like an ocean, and everything that you've ever seen and every emotion that you've ever felt, uh, and tons of other things, are stored inside of your mind and brain. And here's the thing, we've only thought about just a fraction of those things. Your brain picked up tons of things. And from time to time, maybe in your dreams or just a random thought, it's going to nudge you and say, hey, don't you want to think about this? You ought to look at this. So if you think of that, if you begin to get at all those things that are in your brain, the data that's in there, and begin to look at it a little bit differently, you realize that going inward is a perfectly reasonable and rational way to do it. And having a self conversation that's self directed is a rational thing to do as well.
In my work, I've used the example of an iceberg, right? So there's just thousands of things that are stored away below the waves, and we only see the top of what our conscious awareness knows or has even had time to process.
Sure. And you've probably all heard the saying that we only use like 1/10 of our brain. Now, Don, I know for a fact, uses at least 70% of his brain because
Yeah,
he
right.
is a he is a doctor after all. Okay. But me, I'm not so sure about that. But yeah, you're exactly right. When we practice self-directed contemplative conversation or communication, we aren't talking to empty air. I like to think of it as you're pulling up a second chair. Imagine that you're pulling up a chair in your mind and you're creating some mental and emotional space to invite your wiser self to come forward. And so we treat this internal presence as a conversational partner. And to me, that enough is sacred, just to say, look, I have lived 73 years now. There's lots of stuff in me, much more than I've had time to process. And all of that is a part of this big, beautiful journey that I've been on. And the experiences, truths, synchronicities, there's all these things that I brushed aside over the years just because either I was too busy, sometimes too afraid, sometimes I don't look so good in the way I handle things. Nonetheless, my brain recorded it all, but I haven't processed it all.
Our society sort of views imagination as a playground for children, something that's reserved for the young, but it's actually a sophisticated delivery system that we can tap into if we choose and if we actively pursue it.
I don't think imagination is a problem. I think the lack of imagination
Mhm.
has been a bigger problem for us. And our deeper mind packages things in your unconscious in the form of symbols and data and just stores it away, right? When we dialogue with this part of ourselves, we're engaging in active imagination. And I call it parts work. It's grounded, rational, it's a vital part of our integration. When I sit in contemplation, I imagine my inner wisdom taking the form of an ancient guide or companion, and I call this companion for me Brother Thomas. He represents my inner elder. But some people might want to use a Marvel hero, or you might want to call it Thor, or whatever you relate to. Some people make it a religious figure or a master or guru. I mean, the sky is the limit. But the thing of it is that when we have this, what I call archetypal individual in front of us, it puts a face on our conversation and it allows us to talk and to draw things out of our unconscious that we hadn't thought about. And whether you think of it as just talking to yourself or talking to an archetype or you consider it your still small voice, I think the result is always identical. You're accessing some wisdom you didn't know you possess.
So, David, one of the things that I really like about what you just said is you talk about pulling up a second chair, right, and sitting with your inner elder. That sounds simple enough. You don't need years of training to do this. And in order to get there, you break us down into a simple three-step movement you call the rhythm of emptying, asking, and allowing. So, walk us through this direct path inward, please.
Sure, and we wanna keep it really simple. We're just saying, take a moment to empty, don't forget to ask, and then allowing means listen if you really wanna get down to it. So, let's take this first one on emptying. All of us need to hit a 0 balance. The emptying part is settling down. If your mind is on full active alert, you're still in their fight or flight syndrome, you need to calm down a bit. So, you might need to take some nice deep breaths. But here's another thing to remember. When you sit in conversation with yourself, you need to be your best friend and realize you shouldn't have to prove anything to yourself. There's nothing in your life that will make the universe love you more or love you less. And just drop all of your pretense, drop all of your past accomplishments, drop all of your worries and anxieties. Forget about your money or forget about the things that you've done that you're not proud of. Just bring everything to what I call a 0 baseline. Take that nice deep breath and get to the point where you are just like, none of that matters. I'm going to sit and enjoy this moment of peace and quiet. Being a human, I'll just accept that I'm worthy. And right now, this worthy person is sitting in a quiet space.
Let's say we've accomplished that and we've hit zero balance. Now we move on to step two, which is what you call asking.
ASK. I really believe that asking is probably the most important thing we can do in our daily lives. Learning to ask for what we need. I don't know about you, Don, but I've always taken pride in my ability to take care of myself and not only myself, but other people. And there's probably no telling how much unsolicited advice I've given to people over the years. But here's the thing when you're still, then the next thing to do is to turn to that second chair and pose a direct question. You don't have to feel like it needs to be the most impressive question ever asked. Just whatever's on your mind, whatever has been bothering you. It could be like, what is this heavy feeling I'm carrying around? Or why do I feel bad today? Or did I get a message in my dream last night? If so, what was that message? You and I have lots of questions. Some of them are existential, some of them are very minor, but I found sometimes that even the most minor things can be very important to us in a different way. So think about the question you want to ask and put it out there, and then step back, which will bring us to our next part.
Okay, so let's just review. First was emptying, second was asking. That brings us to step 3, which is allowing. And from what I understand from you, this is where we so often trip up.
The allowing part is where you allow that conversation to begin. And we start it by addressing ourselves, by calling yourself by your first name or beginning to talk. Remember, you're probably feeling like you've got to analyze or judge or examine what comes out. But your only job in this step is to witness. Let your thoughts, whatever the symbols are, the feelings are, or whatever you feel like writing down, don't try to edit them. Just write down what you think the answers to this problem probably are. Just write. Ask your question and write down whatever starts coming into your mind. What we're going for is flow, the idea of getting really involved in the answering of this question. Then at some point, you're going to see that you're beginning to get a lot of ideas and information as you begin to write that down. And that's your ability to give the silent part of you permission to speak to you in a way it hasn't been doing for a while.
You refer to these 3 items, emptying, asking, and allowing, as the 3-step rhythm. Let's talk for a minute about what you call the 3 specific demands. So, when the program says this work is forming something more grounded, coherent, and real within us, it outlines 3 specific demands that make this formation possible. The first one you call humility. What does genuine humility mean in the context of this practice?
Humility to me isn't like, okay, I'm going to perform some great thing now. I'm going to sit and talk with myself. When you're sitting here and looking to your inner self, sometimes you think, well, I don't know if what I'm getting here is really all that great, or I don't know if anything's going to happen today or not. What you have to do is just have the humility to sit there and try. Sometimes it takes a little bit of surrender on your part to say, let's see what happens. Let's give it a chance. Let's do this over a period of time and see what comes up for me without putting any kind of restrictions or deciding ahead of time what it should look like. Because what you think it should look like in the beginning is probably not what it's going to be for you. Your unconscious mind doesn't tell you every night, hey, what do you want to dream about tonight? Usually it just gives you a message or a dream that it's hoping that you'll pay attention to. And in this process of contemplative conversation, we have to have the same sort of attitude. We're going to take a moment of humbleness and begin to write what we think we're getting. It could be something that goes right along with what you've been thinking all along, or it might be something very different from what you're doing.
David, I think a lot of men, especially men from our generation and maybe even a little bit older, have a complicated relationship with the idea that there are parts of themselves that they haven't seen. We were shaped in our culture that rewarded us for confidence, for certainty, for knowing exactly who we are, what we're about, what we're doing. And anything else can feel like a confession of some kind of weakness or inadequacy.
That's true, and there's also the opposite of that that's sort of true too. If you were raised in a super religious family like I was taught that there was an all-seeing eye kind of watching everything I did, pinning it down into a notebook and say, "Oops, you sure missed the mark on that one." But the program, this Dream Lab that we're talking about, is whatever you are, whatever you've done, whether it's been a rich life or whether it's been a bumpy life, you are enough. You are that person with all of the good things and with all the bad things. The thing is learning to love and to be okay with that and to say, the whole goal of all of this is to learn from what I can. Is there a way that I can grow from my triumphs and my defeats? Don't close off the possibility of genuine formation. Uh, and be the person who understands that openness is important. I know some things about who I am, but there's more to discover. And if you do, you'll be that person who remains genuinely alive to their own development.
David, I've studied closed systems and open ones, and there are advantages and disadvantages to both. But closed systems, basically, they're protective and they tend to not allow a lot of new information. I think what you're arguing for is to turn our lives into a more open system, one that is willing to accept and bring in new ways of being, new ways of thinking, new ways of assessing our own thoughts.
Sure, Don. And that openness means that you may look at something you thought you did very well and later on realize that maybe it wasn't as good as you thought. Or you may take a situation later on in life where you say, I think I messed that up. And then you look at it and you go, actually, I think you did pretty good on that. So being open is really the best thing that we can do. A genuine willingness to be surprised by what you find, good or bad. In fact, the words good and bad, I'd really like to take out. It's more of an examination of what happened and what did you learn from all of those experiences. So that willingness to look at your experiences and learn from them is really what humility actually looks like in practice.
So first demand, humility. The second demand is what you call patience. And, I got to be honest here. This is one, and I've talked about this in previous podcasts. This is what I personally struggle with the most. I think I have grown a lot in my patience over time, but it's taken years and years to develop. I'm still not where I want to be, even though I can see that I'm much better than I was. There is a deeply ingrained part of me that wants to do the inner work and have it immediately yield a measurable result. And that's true in everything. Maybe the right term is impatience. I want the sudden insight. I want to feel like the practice is rapidly moving somewhere, and that's just not always the case.
Patience is really required of this because sometimes you'll see something and it's just amazing. Some days you get up from your journal or from your conversation with the AI and it's like, wow, I'm just blown away. It's amazing, The sun is shining more brightly as a result of this. And then other times it's like, this was a nothing burger. I mean, nothing. I'm not relating to any of this, but transformation doesn't move at our pace. It moves at its own speed of insight, right? You may see a pattern or truth clearly in some moments, and then the actual living, though, may take a while. And that's the thing. It's one thing to see a pattern or to receive an insight. It's another thing to apply it to your life and get the hang of living it out there. Here's one for me, learning how to be a presence without giving advice to people. I know that being a presence is more important than giving advice, but there's just something about a professor that wants to tell people how to do stuff.
Yeah. We're professors, so we profess, right? So, what is that gap you just talked about? What does that look like, say, in ordinary life?
So I think all of us can find a negative pattern in our behavior. For me, there's this coffee shop that I love so much. I don't know what they put in their coffee, but it's pretty amazing. And I think, okay, there's calories in this. I probably shouldn't do it. I understand that. But then the ability to put that behavior into practice, now that's a different thing, right? We discover, hey, I'm still going to the coffee shop. I'm still drinking in those calories. The insight was real, but the structural change hasn't happened yet. So there's this cognitive dissonance between what I know and what I'm living. So you can throw up your hands and say, well, if this were really working, I wouldn't be doing those things, or I would start doing these things. Because I'm not doing it, it's all the practice fault. But really, patience is the capacity to stay in with all of this and to say, nope, I'm going to give myself time to learn how to do this, how to think about new patterns or replacing habits with something that's a healthier habit or whatever it is that you're doing. So you stay the course, right? You keep returning to the work, you keep journaling the questions, you keep listening. And whether the waters are moving for you or whether they're perfectly still, it's just showing up. Showing up is half of the problem, right? Half of the difficulty.
Our first demand, to go back, is humility. The second one is patience. That brings us to the third demand, courage. When people hear the word courage in the context of aging, they usually expect something dramatic like facing mortality or confronting deep fears. But the courage required for this daily discipline is a little bit different, isn't it?
It's a little quieter, and in some ways, that makes it a little bit harder. The dramatic courage that's energized by adrenaline and crisis. I mean, we've all had that experience, right? But this isn't that kind of courage. It's the courage to look at things that maybe you've delayed. So maybe if you're like me, there have been people that I wouldn't talk to. It's just like I cannot be around this person. I cannot talk about that person. Well, it may take courage for me to sit there and talk about that situation and to face it bravely and listen to my inner guidance without being defensive about, well, they did this and I've responded this way and my behavior is the logical outcome for what they've done. It does take courage to face and listen and to reframe things anew, right? So you're going to encounter parts of yourself uh, that you just as soon not think about. And sometimes, in the worst possible time, maybe you're driving in your car and a thought will come up, and it's like, where, man, that's making me uncomfortable. Why did this come up? Well, it's probably because you've been doing the work and your unconscious mind is saying, hey, I see you're working on stuff. Let's begin to throw some of this stuff and get it resolved and make your life happier. So if some things in your life are off limits to you, um, it will take some courage to bring them back and say, okay, I think I'm old enough. I've lived long enough. I don't have to be overwhelmed by these things. I can be accepting of things that have happened in my life, but I'm going to look at them and I'm going to grow from them and I'm going to learn from them. And my wife has a saying that I've always thought is true. She says, you get the lesson until you get the lesson. And so sometimes we may think we have settled something, but the lessons keep coming back, which means that it's time to face those things.
I hate having to return to things I thought were set. Okay. And maybe sometimes it makes me feel like a failure. Sometimes it just aggravates and frustrates me. But I do start to wonder sometimes, do I have the endurance to do this a second time? Can I face it a second time or a third time? Is there enough time or clarity to keep going?
Sure. And doubts are not signs of failure. They're signs that the work that you're doing is real. And if it were easy and frictionless, I guess that would be more fun to us, but it probably wouldn't touch anything important. The real friction is evidence that you're doing something right. To remain present to your own becoming, even if it's making you a little bit uncomfortable and you can't see where it's going. This is what courage looks like. Sometimes people say, well, why do I want to bring up these old thoughts again? I don't want to think about those things. Well, that's certainly an option for you. You can do that. No one is holding a gun to your head, requiring you to resolve old past wounds and hurts. But sometimes there's a point in our life where we say, hey, I'm old enough and big enough that I can do this.
So I'll just speak for myself. To me, this, you mentioned the word uncomfortable. To me, this uncomfortableness, any reluctance I have to do this kind of work. What if I look closely at my life and I don't like what I find? What if the examination surfaces some painful regrets that, frankly, I'd rather leave alone?
That's an incredible fear, and it could happen. But in my experience, the things that we were most afraid to look at, maybe thought as catastrophic under examination as they do sometimes, really is just avoidance. Avoidance magnifies, right? You just keep saying, oops, I'm not going to talk about that. But examination sometimes can bring us a clarity. And here's the thing about having a conversation with ourselves. Conversations with ourselves is not a woodshed session where we straighten
Mhm.
ourselves out. It is just a matter of learning to bring questions before us or examining dreams or examining lingering thoughts that we had from the day before, whatever we decide we want to talk about, and examining them for what they bring to us. Sometimes what they bring to us will be great joy, and sometimes they'll bring some pain. But that doesn't mean that one was good and the other one was bad. It just means that we can look at things. And I've had many things in my life that were painful, and yet they were also the source of great growth in my life, if I'm really honest about it. And that's a good thing. Or it could serve as a stimulus for better growth.
I'd like to pivot to something you shared just last week, in fact, about how we process stress test and look at what surfaces from the second chair from a fresh angle. And you surprised me last week when you mentioned this, and I was hoping we'd get around to talking more about it. You've been bringing an unexpected companion to the table, frankly, and that's artificial intelligence.
Yeah. And it sort of surprised me too. But I decided that, hey, I'm going to give this a try. I know it may sound surprising, but I'm not suggesting that AI is alive or that it possesses a soul or that it's your spiritual source or that you should think of it as anything more than a highly sophisticated and reflective mirror. But what AI does have is access to lots of history and philosophy and thinking and the world's knowledge that it can reflect back to you as you begin to discuss some of the things that you have been thinking about. And as you get some of that new information and see your information anew, that creates a really interesting situation for yourself where you begin to have a different kind of resonance than you've had before. So I think of it as a highly sophisticated mirror that we use.
So, one of the reasons why we're doing this is a four-part series on what we're calling the Dream Lab. And one of the reasons we're doing this is because, David, you have been actually doing this practice for 50 years, and artificial intelligence is actually really new. So, how does a modern digital tool help you see the internal truths more directly than you have in the past, perhaps?
Well, one of the things that I have really loved doing is writing down a dream snippet and asking the AI to evaluate this dream based upon what any archetypes it may find or any symbols or metaphors that the dream brings up, and to explain how it would interpret the dream given those restrictions. I'll ask it to tell me what does it look like from a psychological point of view, a spiritual point of view, or a mystical point of view. Whatever point of view you want to analyze your dream from, AI is willing to do it. And it can find parallels in history. It can find parallels in politics, parallels in so many things, right? When we're looking at talking and having these conversations, I think it's good to reflect back over some things that you've been thinking about. As it mirrors back to you, I found that AI is a very, very, very useful tool to helping you learn more about what's been going on in your mind. The other thing that AI is especially good at is teasing out. And so imagine that you have a ball of string that's all wadded up and it's kind of got knots in it. AI is sort of like taking that string and taking out the knots and putting things in apple pie order for you. So it will say, you've actually been thinking about three things, and these three things have these subcategories to them. And sometimes I never realized that's exactly what was going on in my mind. They've just been sort of floating around in the zero space in my brain. But AI says, I think we can put order to this. When the AI organizes your thoughts, there is something very reinforcing about seeing your random ideas being put into a logical sequence for your reconsideration. And then as you identify with that, having a conversation. So I'm finding it extremely helpful, and I encourage others to try it and see what they come up with. Love for you to share that with Don and me in this program.
I love what you're saying there. I'm going to put it in my own words, and it may not be correct, so feel free to push back here. But you just used the word reconsider. And I think what you're saying is that AI is a great tool. It can give you a lot more things and ways at looking at something, giving you more, additional information. You're not looking at AI to give you an interpretation of your dream or what you should do, but it's giving you things that you then can reconsider in this process of your own analysis. Is that fairly accurate?
Absolutely. And I love to reconsider some of the things that I've been thinking about. For instance, a year ago, would take a walk and then speak into my iPhone and record my conversation of things going through my mind and some of the ideas that I'd been thinking about, some things that were troubling me or things that I wanted to think more about. And I would just have this conversation with myself. So it's a long ramble. It was like 30 minutes. My walk usually goes about 45 minutes. And then I would take that conversation and have it transcribed, and AI would then sort it into a logical sequence of what was the conversation about. It was taking all those random ideas and organizing them in a nice outline type of form, which allowed me to then reconsider my ideas, Don. So that's one of the ways that we can use it. But it's not telling you how to live your life. It's feeding back to you what you've been saying and giving you ways of reconsidering it.
Let's talk now about the actual texture of the practice day to day. What does the sustainable rhythm of inner work, which is what we're talking about, really, inner work, actually involve over weeks, months, and years?
Well, let's not make it a burden, and let's not make it like an obligation that you have to do every day, or if you don't do it, you're a failure. For me, the practice is daily, but it's not really all that intentional, and what I want to say, dramatic, right? When I get up in the morning, usually I try to remember, were there any dreams that I can remember even a fragment of? I speak into my little iPad. You can use notes and it'll transcribe it for you. And just write out what you remember of that dream. Or you could use the same process to say, I don't remember a dream, but here's a couple of things that I've been thinking about lately. Or here's a memory from yesterday, the thing I didn't like about yesterday. You can choose, right? And that's a simple process. And sometimes I've had that done in, I don't know, 5 to 6, 7 minutes flat. And then I began to tease it out with AI. And that's where it really gets interesting for me. Sometimes I won't tell you how much time I spend, but sometimes I spend a lot of time because I want to reorganize it. I want to put it into some personal blog or something that I remember because it's meaningful to me and it's been a meaningful practice. And that's where the growth comes, I think.
So the accumulative benefit is really happening whether or not we can feel it in the moment, right? It's that consistency principle that we talked about in our health episode.
That's a really great way of comparing it. And if you'll just give yourself some time, even in a few weeks, even in a month, you might be really surprised at how much more awareness and knowledge about life, living situations, things that have bothered you or puzzled you over the years, how you come to a greater understanding of those things. And it's the development of your inner life. Really, what you're doing is you're letting those things that have been around inside of you reorganize into a coherent thing that your waking mind can understand. And that creates a beautiful resonance with you.
David, I'm trying to rebuild my walking habit now. And the other day I had a bit of an accident. Okay. And I'm not going to be able to walk for a little while. I need to let my body rest. And inevitably, even if somebody's working at this practice, they're going to lose the thread and you're going to miss days, right? Maybe even weeks, right? Life's going to intervene. And so, how do we handle the falling away so that the practice can ultimately become permanent without beating ourselves up all the time?
If you're motivated to do it, by all means, always do it on those days. On other days, give yourself a break. If you need a break, you need a break. Some days you just think, I'm not up for this. I'm not going to do it. I believe in living organically. And if you really, really don't feel like doing it or don't want to do it or are not in the mood to do it, or you can't do it just because you're on vacation or you don't have a place where you can be alone, then that's okay. Right? At this part of our lives in the fifth season, Don, we're about being what we can be and honoring when we can't be something. And I'm just totally down with that. But we're thinking, what can we do to make sense of this journey we've been on? And how can we leave a legacy for those that we know and love that shows them that as we've lived our lives, we've learned something and grown from it. And we continue to become even bigger and better versions of ourselves as we make this last part of our journey.
Humility, patience, courage, and the daily rhythm of the second chair. David, as we close today, is there a single word that points to something unified here?
Take yourself so seriously that you faithfully want to examine, look, and have these contemplative conversations with yourself. I hold on that we're having these conversations with ourselves. And over time, that produces very slowly, but deliberately and honestly, it recreates us from within. And it creates this inner authority, maybe a quiet authority that people can't give you and you can't really give yourself. It only comes from a life that's been examined and from somebody who's done the work and hasn't turned away from it.
We move into the fifth season of our lives, the game really changes. We don't have to accumulate credentials or status anymore. The only things of ultimate importance to us are to show love, express deep compassion, and to do good. This practice we've been talking about and the tools we use to refine it are how we can harvest some of that raw data in our lives and transform it into that love and goodness.
If you're one of my fellow doubters who still feel like, well, you're just making it all up, that's okay. Remember that doubt is not the enemy here. It's okay to doubt. It's okay to be skeptical. And in fact, my companion, my guide, Brother Thomas, was also known as the doubting disciple. That's one of the reasons why I like Thomas. But pull up that second chair, clear your ledger to zero, and see what a beautiful moment of wise silence can do for you.
Thank you for being with us today. The cost of inner work is real and it's entirely worth paying. Subscribe to Fifth Season wherever you listen to podcasts and share this episode with someone you know who is in the serious business of their own becoming.
Don and I want to remind all of you, aging is a privilege. Let's all do it well. Hey, we'll see you next time.
Take care of yourselves and keep showing up.